Welcome to Faith Rising, a podcast about living with bold faith in the modern age. In this episode, Apostle Chuck Pierce interviews Daniel and Amber Pierce.
Hi, we want to welcome you to our very first program of Faith Rising, and it's just such an exciting time to be in here. There's a lot of joy in here, and we're really excited to do this first program with you. Chuck Pierce will be interviewing Daniel and I for this first program to help you get to know us a little bit better.
Wow, what a blessing. You know, we've gone through so many changes over the last 2.5 years, all of us. And when I think of this program and I look at this place, you guys coming back from Israel brought us to a whole new place. And so for us to enter into this new show about faith rising, because I think faith is going to have to rise from now on in all of us. We got to get to know you and all the things y'all have had to rise beyond and understand by faith as you've moved forward. I can't think of two better people to lead us in this new venture that we're starting here. So let me ask y'all a question. First of all, and I think a lot of people that are out there listening to this wonder, how did y'all even get together?
Well, it was awesome. I mean, it's a great testimony of how we met, because it was the first time, it was actually the second time the Lord spoke to me. The first time the Lord spoke to me, he told me not to date for 1 year. And then the second thing he showed me was actually Daniel. But I didn't know Daniel existed. I didn't know his name. I just had a dream, and it was the face of a man. And then one night, they started having Shabbat services here. It was back when we were in the old building. And Robert Heidler was teaching. And I saw Daniel on the front row from behind. And I just thought, he's well built. He looks like the kind of guy I would date. He's the only one I've seen that looks, that he's got a good shape from behind.
I was glad I was the only one you had eyes for. So we were on the same page.
Okay, so then, after we get done with the Shabbat service, which I didn't know what that was back then, but Robert was teaching about Shabbat, and after the service was over, there was a game night. And so we walked downstairs for the game night. There was a coffee shop down there and everything. And then Daniel turned around, and when I saw his face, I realized it was the face of the man in the dream that I had. And he immediately charged towards me. It was like there was no time between when he turned around and just started walking right at me.
Well, I think anybody would have charged towards you. You guys.
I know how it is with church. You can't wait around too long. You better go and talk to him.
Is that the way you remember it? This happening?
Yeah, that's exactly how I remember it. And I feel like the Lord just had me in a place in my life where he had already prepared me for that. And when I saw the person that I knew was the one that I was supposed to be with, I went straight to Amber and began to talk to her and strike up that relationship.
Now, one thing I remember was at that game night. I remember coming down there and meeting you. And when I shook your hand, I went back to Pam and said, that girl is going to marry Daniel.
And when I shook your hand, I knew that you knew that I was going to be your daughter-in-law. And I told my spiritual friends, I had like two, I was like, I swear, I think he knows that I'm going to be his daughter-in-law.
It's crazy how faith works.
Yeah.
See, that's what we want to impart in the show, is to show people how faith really works. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy. I look at all the things you guys have gone through all these years, but you knew God put you together, and that's really how we walk by faith. Now you come from totally different backgrounds. You're different type of people. You're like, I know Daniel's mom and I are so different. It's amazing to me how God puts different people together. And you, when we first met you, you were so evangelistic. You had just come to know the Lord. Tell us, how did you come to know the Lord?
Well, normally when somebody comes to know the Lord, it's at a very desperate, whenever you're older, at a very desperate place in your life. And so that's where I was. I was at a very desperate place in my life. There was about 1.5 years where my friends were really worried about me. I just had this conversation with one of my friends, and she said, I remember one day you asked me in the bathroom, we were out somewhere, and you asked me if I thought you were going crazy, and I said, actually, I think you might be. And I hadn't been before, but there was a lot of traumatic events that happened at one time. Some family stuff, some personal things, and I just spun out of control for about a year and a half. And then one night, it was Thanksgiving Day, I just could not stop crying, and then I felt a presence come into the room. And it was almost a little scary because I knew nobody else was in the house. And I said, God, is that you? And I just knew it was. And then the Holy Spirit just wrapped me up. It was like enveloped me, came inside me, totally changed me. And the feeling, the way it felt, I just kept asking God, please don't leave me. Don't leave me ever again.
Wow.
And I changed overnight.
I mean, so many people don't have an experience like that. I know I had a visitation when I was 18, and yet they don't have that type of experience. You didn't come to know the Lord at all like that. Now tell us about your background and how He came into your life. You have been so devoted to the Lord almost all your life, but I still know you have to have a time where you actually form that relationship with Him.
Yeah, if there's one thing that I've learned, throughout my life, it's that whatever background that we come through, we each individually have to have that moment where we come into a place of faith and belief in the Lord, and it's a personal thing for each and every one of us. And I grew up in you and Mom's home. I was adopted when I was 3 days old, and grew up under the family that the Lord put me in. And our family, of course, was always in ministry, so I had Dad's influence in my life, and I had always seen that. But I got saved actually when I was 5 years old. I remember it was leading up to Christmas, and I'd started to make out a Christmas list for Mom and Dad to get me all the toys that I wanted from the toy store.
List.
And it was a very long list. It included almost every toy at the toy store. And so I got to the point where I began to realize we didn't have a lot at the time. We didn't have the kind of finances when I was that age, that the Lord has blessed us with over the years. And I realized that I wasn't going to be able to get all of those things that were on the list. And the more I began to ponder it and decide, well, I want this thing or I want that thing, the more it began to weigh on me, and it just really got me to a point where I felt mixed up in my spirit. And just like Amber said, where she went to one of her friends and she asked, hey, do you think I'm going crazy? And they said, yes. Sometimes we need that little word of affirmation that rises up inside of us that says, you've gone down a direction that you're not supposed to go down. And whether we're 5 years old or we're in our 20s, the Lord has to bring each of us to that point. And so when I realized that, I walked into the bathroom. It was a Sunday morning, and my mom was sitting doing her makeup, and I said, Mom, I need to tell you what's been going on with me. And she stopped and took the time in our busy schedule trying to get out the door for church, and really listened to what I had to say. And I explained to her what I had gone through, that this thing had welled up inside of me, and I realized that I couldn't fill that hole that was inside of me with all these different things in life that I was trying to grab for. And she really prayed with me and led me to the Lord that morning, and I've been a believer ever since I was 5 years old.
And a devoted believer. I would remember when we'd go visit somebody, because I would do visitation for the church we were in. You would go over to the neighbors and ask them, do you know the Lord? It really impacted your life. But I also remember the same thing about you. When I first met you, you would witness to a fly. That's how saved you had gotten.
Yeah.
I mean, you knew grace had come in your life. And you talked about trauma. And I know on this show, you guys are going to be very transparent and talk a lot about trauma and things that people go through. And it's going to be so helpful for all of us. And especially, when I look at you two, you didn't start off in ministry. You started off together. You were at TWU.
Yeah.
And you were over Young Life, what's it?
Youth for Christ.
Youth for Christ.
And I was the evangelist for the Baptist
Student Union.
Student Baptist.
You weren't Baptist at all.
BSM.
Yeah, you weren't Baptist at all either.
No,
you didn't come from Baptist. You were Catholic, weren't you?
I was Catholic, and when I got saved, I I couldn't find a church to go to. And so I went back to I watched Christian televangelism. That's why I think this is special, is because some people don't have anything other than what is coming through their living room.
That's totally right.
And I didn't have anywhere to go yet. And I visited the Catholic church one more time. And in the church that I visited, I looked up and there was a giant cross with a big dead Jesus on it. And I just knew that I wasn't supposed to go back there again. When the Holy Spirit filled me, I knew he wasn't dead. He's alive.
Wow.
So I thought, why is there this giant image of him dead when he's risen? He's not dead.
I so feel the Spirit when you say that. And that's where faith really comes. See, faith has to have an object. Mm-hmm. And if you don't find something higher than you and it become real in your life, it's hard to walk by faith. You walk in a humanistic type environment. And I have watched you two have to walk through so many things. But then, she was at TW, you were at the police academy. And how'd y'all develop your relationship?
Well, I was working full time and going to the police academy at night during that time. And Amber was in school and was a fashion major. So she had to go into school every night at, 11 o'clock. And
I was just making time, whatever time you had for you. And then you normally drop me back off at the lab so I could finish my projects at 11 o'clock at night.
I got out of school at North Texas Police Academy every night at 9 o'clock, and then I would go and pick Amber up, and we'd go sit and drink coffee until 11 o'clock when I had to take her to school to do her work with the fashion laboratory.
Just awesome.
Yeah, the lab fashion lab.
Yeah.
Laboratory.
And so see the difference y'all came. Now you went to the police academy, but you also worked in the police field.
Right. I was working in Denton County Jail at the time, and it was during that time that the Lord really turned my life back around. I had been saved since I was 5 years old, but when I turned 16, I went through a period of time where I really had decided to live for myself, and that lasted until about a year before I met Amber. And it was actually one day when I was sitting in the jail that the Lord came back into my life. I picked up one of the books out of the inmates' library, and I began to read it, and it was a book about miracles that the Lord had done in different people's lives over different things. Wow. And it really jarred me. And in that surrounding, in the atmosphere that I was in the jail, I had a lot of time to really think about it and see how people's lives were affected, in that environment. And the Lord came back into my life.
So how long were you a police officer?
I was with Denton County Sheriff's Office in the jail for 5 years, and then I went to work for Salina Police Department for another 5 years on patrol.
How was that after y'all had courted and you just got married? What was it like being married to a policeman?
Well, first I'll go back to the first time we even met. I said, how long do you think you're going to be a policeman? Because I just thought, I knew that life wasn't really for me. He said 5 years. And it was the first conversation we had. He said, I don't want to be jumping over a fence, chasing after someone when I have a 5-year-old at home. So I said, okay, good, 5 years. And we've just met. And so,
hey, don't let her fool you. Our first date was at a shooting range. We met in the Walmart parking lot to buy ammunition.
Yeah, I couldn't figure out if it was a date or not. I was pretty confused. But finally, after we went out shooting together, one of my guy friends had said, we're just friends. One way that you'll know a guy is wanting to date you is if they offer to pay. So I remembered that. I thought, okay, he just asked me to lunch after we went shooting, because of course I'm not going to think it's a date if we're meeting at the Walmart parking lot for ammunition. And so I thought, okay, well, I'll offer to pay, and if he doesn't let me, then it means he's interested in me. And he did offer to pay.
Oh, he paid.
He paid.
He grew up right.
Yeah.
In that area. So, but then came a time in your life where you both knew you had a different call. And I think a lot of people are dealing with that right now. And your call was very peculiar. It was very specific to Israel. And now you found out you had Jewish blood in you.
Yeah, that was just... I had no idea. I'd grown up with people asking me.
I knew you looked like a beautiful Jewish lady.
Yeah, I had grown up with people asking me if I was Jewish, and I was always saying, of course not, I'm Catholic. And, you know, when you're Catholic, you think that's a race. And
Yeah.
a lot of people do. You think you're just, I mean, because you're born into it, you know. And but my grandfather kind of accidentally told us, I guess, and I don't think he knew that it was going to mean anything to me, but he was just joking around about it one day. I'm glad Daniel was there as a witness, but he made some jokes and just said, I'm just an old Jew. And I was like, what? I've never heard that before. And he said, yeah, I'm Jewish. And I was shocked. I mean, I was just shocked because I knew we in this ministry, you know, had a call to Israel, but I had no clue that I was Jewish. And by
yet
race.
I think
you know.
I always thought you were Jewish.
Yeah.
And your grandmother had Jewish blood as well.
We had to, I mean, that was never told to me, but we found some paperwork on
yeah,
my
it was
sisters.
amazing.
Yeah.
You researched it all. You
Yeah.
found your heritage. And then Israel kept becoming a reality with y'all. And how did you feel you were called to Israel? How did you even feel you were called?
Well, when I was a young child, 5 or 6 years old, I had a couple of different things that the Lord had put on my heart, and one of them was to either go into law enforcement or the military, and for some reason I knew that was something I was supposed to do in my life, but the other side of that was I knew I was called in some way to serve the ministry. And I remember the time that you took me to, was it Houston, Texas, where they had that convention with...
It was a Christ for the Nation up here.
Was it up here?
Yeah.
Okay.
In Dallas.
Dad took me to a convention of the nations where they were talking about missionary work, and we walked into this huge warehouse, and like all the way around the room they had different booths with different setups and things, and I was really drawn to the ones that were the Middle East. And I remember talking to Dad even at that age and saying, I think that at some point in my life I'm going to have something to do with this and serve the ministry. So that kind of was at the back of my mind for the period of time that I was in law enforcement, and for that last few years that I was on patrol, the Lord just really began to draw that out of me. And when things came to an end in law enforcement, I knew that was the direction that I was supposed to go.
Wow. What was it like being married to a policeman?
So that's not good. I mean, it's just not good.
Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, it's a stressful job, and they're really tired when they come home. I mean, I feel like when Daniel, every time he'd walk, he probably didn't realize I saw it this way, but when he'd walk in the door, he was kind of bluish from being tired. And the hours were odd, and I think they were short-staffed, but he just looked like he'd been beat down every day when he came home. And so things aren't really exciting, during that time. They weren't very, it wasn't the high point of our lives.
Yeah, and yet now, it's so stressful for police.
Yeah.
Maybe y'all will talk about that sometimes on this show. What it's really like when you're out there in the world and you're really not of the world, but you're having to just operate in trying to keep the world in some sort of order. Now, with that, though, when you talk about stress, you guys went to Israel. Now, I can go back with Daniel. I went to Pam, and I think you were 3 months old. I was looking in your crib, and the Spirit of God spoke to me and said, He will go to Israel in the time of war. And so I went and told Pam, and she said, why would you tell me that after just getting a newborn? Can I enjoy him for a little while? And yet, you guys went to Israel together. Talk about having to have faith. And I know you'll be sharing some of this with us in days ahead. And you lived through 2 physical wars there, let alone all the warfare that people really don't understand about Israel. I think we romanticize Israel a lot. It's God's covenant land. It's His prototype for the nation. It's His people, but it is not an easy place to live. So their being there in war, I can't say it was any less stressful for you, was it? Especially being a mother, and you've had 2 children in Israel.
Yeah. Well, the way that the Lord called us to Israel, we were actually in Israel. We'd gone with you.
Yeah.
And you were in a meeting with Avi and Haya Mizrahi at Martin and Norma Sarvis's house. And you invited us to join the meeting. And you all of a sudden said, I think Daniel and Amber are going to be moving to Israel. And you didn't know yet that I had a dream that morning and told Daniel that I dreamed we were moving to Israel. And so both of us asked each other, did you tell my dad that dream? So we were shocked that you had said that right that morning after I had that dream.
Isn't that amazing how faith works? Because what I want all of us to understand, faith, you're going to be speaking out something. See, the issue of salvation, I remember even last week when we were doing Passover here, you got up on stage and said, I am thankful to the Lord because he saved me. I love the Lord because he saved me. Faith comes when you can't get saved without faith. It comes by grace, but you have to embrace the Lord by faith. And then the Bible says you have to confess it. So see, all faith has some sort of confession about it that we have to go through. And with that, I remember when I met you and I told Pam about you were going to marry Daniel, and she said, don't say a word about that. I couldn't say anything about that, but we were in that meeting, and it was beyond a shadow of a doubt. It just came out of me. You're going to come live here. And I knew that with both of you. I knew it so deep in my heart, and that faith expression really propelled you there for another 10 years. So see, we're looking at the cycles of your life, and the exciting thing I think you guys are going to be sharing are how these cycles had hard times in them, but you always found your faith in the midst of it. That's what we have to understand, and that's what the show's about. Now, I really see that is going to be an incredible, incredible time that y'all lead us through. I think you'll be having guests on the show, too.
For sure.
Absolutely.
Because when I think of you two, this is what I think about for all of you that are listening today. Daniel researches and usually has 1, 2, 3, 4 of what really is going on out there. And you have this innate ability just to live and perceive things so clearly and correctly. And I love the way you will say what you believe. And you don't hold back. And I love the way that you make sure that what you are saying is so clear. So we're going to have both of that on this show. And the thing about faith, it works two ways. It works, you have discernment by both the Word and the Spirit. I think we're going to get a lot of that on this show also.
That's right.
And talk about a lot of issues. Recently, we did a show because you guys, back in October, after living in Israel, had such a burden that we start preparing for what's coming in America. How did the Lord put that on your heart?
That could only be the Lord, because that's not, I mean, you know, I always keep a full pantry, and that's something that we learned living in Israel. And when you cook a lot, you have to. And that was something that living in Israel forced us to do also, was to learn how to cook a lot and make a lot of things from scratch. For example, if we wanted Mexican food, we couldn't just go to a Mexican restaurant. I had to learn how to make enchilada sauce and all of that. But we were in Florida in October, and we were going to we were staying in Airbnbs, and I was noticing as we went grocery shopping, a lot of people were complaining about there not being the things that they wanted to be there. It wasn't that the grocery stores were empty, it was just that things that people would normally buy weren't there. They didn't have the choices that they would normally have. And I realized, I think we need to start preparing a little bit more and having canned goods and just making sure, honestly, that we have 6 months worth of food. And then, you know, Marty Cassidy, who's been part of this ministry for so long, she's living in Florida now, and her new husband had told me, well, we're trying to get 6 months worth of food in our house. And I said, well, that's what I feel like we're supposed to do too. And so, you know, that's where that came from. And
just key. And now everybody's talking about the food shortage.
It's all over the news. The president has said we need to prepare.
Just amazing.
And I think it's going to be harder than what people. I don't think it's just a food shortage. I think that sounds like there's just not some of the things you want. But I do think that there will be times that it'll be hard to go, or even dangerous to go to the grocery store.
And then I think you might be right.
Yeah.
And then I know you guys, since you've been back, and I know we'll hear about that on one of the shows. By faith, God brought you back just like he took you. And that's the sort of things we want to hear. How does your life change so drastically overnight the way y'all's did? And then once you got back, you realized things weren't going to open up for you to just go back and do the same thing.
Right.
So actually, you went to Oklahoma and bought land, and I really think that is a picture of things to come, how we redevelop our lives in the midst of the crisis that we're in. And I can only look forward to you guys sharing that so much with me. Now, let me ask you something else. I think you two have influenced my life greatly. I can go back and see times, even that meeting you were talking about when you were, I think you were 6 when we went to that meeting, and you some way had that impression from the Lord about how you would be in missions. I remember you looking up at all these nations, pointing to them and say, Dad, do you see all those nations up there, those dark nations? You're going to be going to those. Well, since then, I've gone around the world 160 times. And ministry has a lot of trials. You guys have gone through lots of trials.
Yes.
We want to hear about that in this show, the trials, because I don't think people realize the cost that you have to go through to, many are called but few are chosen.
Yeah.
That's right.
And a lot of people look at a ministry and think it's glamorous, but the cost of it is greatly. For me to do what you told me I was going to do, I had to leave my family. And so, you know, that has been a great influence. Then I look at you. When God brought you in my life, I was able to start processing a lot of things in me growing up, trauma. We have a very similar life.
Yeah.
And you have been so influential in working through things you've gone through that has allowed me to make sure that I am healed from things I've gone through. It has been an amazing walk with both of you. And this show is going to capture that. And this show is going to deal with a lot of the issues that are out there. You know, there's so much out there right now. We've already talked about police. We've talked about how you've got teenagers and then you've got little ones.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I think y'all are going to give us some insights on that too, things you're going through with that. And things I don't want to have to go through again, but I get to watch my kids go through. And so I think the show is just so key. And the thing we want you to understand is faith has to rise within us. We're in such changing times right now.
We're really excited about this whole process with the show, and you know, everything that the Lord's going to bring out of it, and sharing a lot of our testimonies of how the Lord led us through hard things that produced our faith and keeps us moving in faith. And you know, you were just talking about the generations. Each generation has a new challenge, and that's something that we really want to address, you know, through the show and through what God's called us to in this season, is to begin to work on and see how the Lord's going to work creatively in a new generation to bring out the same faith that He did in a prior generation. And that's how we see the Lord link things together in time as time goes on.
Absolutely.
And raise up those who will really have an effect in the world and have an effect on the generations.
And you will share about a lot you went through in Israel.
Absolutely.
And a lot with your families.
And in our travels, you had mentioned, you know, that we've been to many different countries. We've been through some really scary things, some really fun things. Some of the people that are standing here in the room with us now were in some of those countries with us. So the Lord's really going to use this show also to draw out some of those testimonies and apply them to now time.
Well, I can't think of two people that have been more called to the nations than me in this ministry. I mean, you two have traveled to so many nations. You're not afraid to go to other nations. You're not afraid to go into other cultures. And that's a rare gift, especially right now. And So we want to hear about some of those places you've gone to and some of the places you've really learned from as you've gone. And so I just think, I can't think of two better people to bring us to a new level of faith than you two. And Faith Rising is, every time we watch this show, I believe faith will rise in everybody that watches it.
That's what we want.
And so, all of you, don't miss each week on Thursday night what we feel is necessary to hear about so faith can rise within you. This is going to be an awesome, awesome time as we move forward.
And what are we going to talk about next week?
Next week, I want you to talk about something and that is so important for us to understand. You mentioned the generations at the end, and you just had a party for your 13-year-old, and the little kids were there, the 13-year-olds, and all those kids that were dancing and having a great time. And I think we have to talk about how in America we have had a hard season, and one of the greatest influences is the pain of abortion.
Yeah.
And I maybe I'll be able to sit here and you ask me how I feel about certain things.
Yeah.
I don't always talk from the pulpit because I'm dealing with people's pain most of the time.
Yeah.
Abortion is a very painful thing that that you go through individually, and that we are going through as a nation. And I think maybe your mother will even come be with us next week. And you'll want to watch that, because if you've ever known the pain or experienced the pain of abortion, you realize the preciousness of life.
Yeah.
And I think we'll talk about life. I think that's the way we'll approach it.
Yeah.
We'll talk about life and what God meant for life. And I can't think of two people better. And right now, you'll tell us what's happening in Texas, because it's really leading in some areas. And then we'll talk about how the enemy wants to take life from us.
Yeah.
Join with us next week on Faith Rising.